Thank you everyone for joining LT Harper's Cyber Sessions. Today I have Debbie Forster, the CEO of the Tech Talent Charter, joining me. Thanks very much, Debbie, for agreeing to have a conversation with me about talent in the cyber industry. I'm going to jump straight in, if you don't mind.
That sounds great.
Ask you if you believe that there is a talent gap in the cyber industry, or do you think that the problem with having so many unfilled cyber vacancies lies elsewhere?
I think I'm going to give you a mixed answer because I think there is, like any area of tech, there is a skills and a talent gap that we're trying to find enough people to do that. But I think in particular, when I've been looking at the stats around cyber, it is a more complex issue because I think we need to get companies to think more strategically around cyber, because everybody wants to hire from the cyber pool, but they only want 3 to 5 years experience. And that is a luxury in such a tight market. And we need to get people to start thinking differently in the space.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Do you think there are any kind of misconceptions or any myths about the cyber talent gap that we should address here?
I think there's some myths and illusions on both sides of the desk. I think there's a lot of myth busting about what a career in cyber looks like and can be, and to be more inclusive and to move it away from feeling like it's a dark art that only those born to the line for cyber can get into cyber. So we need to break that down, I think, on the talent side. But I think, like most of tech, particularly in cyber though, companies need to realize it is no longer if you build it, they will come. This is an element where they need to think about how they are part of creating skills and talent, not just consuming. I think the companies who are having the greatest success in the space are inclusive, are thinking about different routes into tech, apprenticeships, retraining, cross-training, hiring from boot camps, and grow your own. And there's a lot of merit to that we can talk about in this session. But we need companies to think about this differently. What is the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing again and again and expecting different outcomes. Well, particularly in cyber, we need companies to take a step back and think about how they can remove the barriers to really get and then grow, nurture, and retain great people in cyber.
And you talked up front about kind of the companies that have been successful in kind of attracting more cyber talent. They've been inclusive. Can you think of kind of examples of where that's been displayed particularly well?
Well, I think you need to look at this. You need to start from first principles, and it is not just at the attraction and recruitment piece. It is looking at within your culture of the organization. And do you have the environment that will attract all sorts of talent, that there is that sense of we grow people, we retain people? Because if you're hemorrhaging through people, you need to figure out how to stop that. Otherwise, you're just going to burn through your cyber. And I think there's a lot around, it's not just about inclusive policies and practices. It's about that training and support we give to our hiring managers and our team leaders and our team managers so that they know how to get the best from people. But then it is going back to first principles on those attraction and recruitment processes. Really ask yourself what is required. What is it that you must have? That shopping list of 1,000 things, no surprises, you're not going to get the applicants you want. Where companies are flipping that to look for potential and how to already assess what they need. And as I said, be willing to grow. And the last thing I'd look, we've done some work with research for DCIT and then the Charter's own work on a report. There's some easy things that companies can do when they are thinking about things like flexible work, part-time work, that make a huge difference. And where you offer those things, putting that in from recruitment onwards gets a much wider pool, and not just of women. Where companies are actively removing those barriers to entry, they get, and more importantly, keep great talent.
Yeah. I think that keeping talent is particularly important and sometimes ignored, right? Because it's more difficult to measure, isn't it? So
But it is the companies that are looking at that. There's some rude awakenings there. And we know the stats, and there's some worrying stats about people leaving, not just your company, but leaving tech. And women are more likely to do that. And, it does require some changes to systems, to ways of working in order to retain people. But we need companies to start seeing that training, progression, those sorts of things. That's not a cost, that's an investment. And
yeah,
if you measure that up against the cost of losing people and
yeah,
going through that whole rehiring piece, that's an investment for
yeah,
great culture and success. But it, again, as I say, and I think in particularly, it's hard times. People are tightening their belts. But
mm,
surely the smartest thing to do in tightening your belt is to look around and say, how do I keep the people
yeah,
I have?
yeah,
Because to lose them is huge cost on all fronts.
yeah, absolutely. And I think my next question really kind of addresses both that recruitment and the retention piece, and it's specifically around the part that representation plays in interviews, and in particular, not just interviews actually, in any industry kind of environment, but in particular about visual representation. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's essential. And I think it is why companies need to look at that retention and growth and promotion. Because any group, when they look to join a company, will talk about, can they see people like me who are thriving, succeeding, growing, and making their way up to the top? And that representation, that visual representation, is important because it's role models, etc. But it is also, you need those people at the table to ask those questions, to make sure that we're challenging and always making sure that it is the best culture there. And it's hard. Getting those first few hires is hard. And so where you don't have that visual representation, I know of companies that say, we have a smaller proportion of women, but we make sure during the recruitment process, every candidate will be at least working and talking to one person of their gender, of their ethnicity, to see disability on those pieces. And then where you don't have that representation, working with groups who can help you build those bridges to change those ways. But I think it's also important to remember not all representation is visual. And so
Yeah,
that culture where people can bring their whole selves to work. So where people are, when you're looking to join a company where there is talk about safe places in terms of LGBTQI plus, neurodiversity. So yes, absolutely. Companies need to look around and say, do we look like a team that anyone could come and work with and thrive? But also to look and see, do we sound like that? Because it isn't just, there are a great many invisible lenses that are
yeah.
a part of making a really inclusive culture.
Yeah, are we walking the walk? Are we doing all that we can to make sure that people would want to come here and, regardless of what their background is, right? I think that's super important. Interestingly, I've been having this conversation with a lot of my clients, and one client shared with me that the downside of not having representation was they had interviewed a very senior female in the cyber industry, and she turned down their offer because she said the other company that I interviewed at, there was a woman on the interview panel and there wasn't at your company. And they entirely changed around their interview process. They've actually got a really, really good balance of male and female staff in their cyber teams, but they just didn't think that it was particularly important to have that representation to show people that they can succeed.
And I think it is that mindset all the way through. Those days of jobs where they have to come and impress us,
Mm,
there are so many people and we can turn away so many people. We will just roll up however we can and throw these crazy things at them and they will come to us. That we need to understand, it is about thinking about the user experience of
yeah,
applicants. Because I think the other thing to remember, even the people you don't hire now
yeah,
could be your clients, your partners, your suppliers. So this is your chance to show who you are on every step of the process and convert people to be advocates,
yeah,
ambassadors for who you are,
yeah,
not
yeah,
just let's just choose someone. So thinking through every step and using the stuff that we can be great at in tech, which is that UX. So asking ourselves, what is the UX? And there are companies who get it, who are thinking about the employee experience on every step of the pipeline, and then extending that into the applicant process. And I know that I've been speaking at events where we talk about that, and I can see with some that rankles them. There's, why should we be so nice? But it is about, wouldn't you want the best interview process so you can see people at their best? And it's removing those barriers so you see people, because we're never at our best if we're stressed, if we're anxious, if we feel under threat. So it's in everyone's interest to get a really clear look at people and let them have a clear look at us, because you do want a good fit there. But we need to change the lens. We need to use that UX mojo that we have in other contexts and use that when we think about the people in our company. And you and I talk about talent, and it's a useful term, but I also like to strip that back and sometimes just think, this is people. Absolutely. And don't we want to treat people well, with respect, put them at ease? Don't we want to attract them and get the best things for the best people to make great products?
And provide that environment. I always say with interviews to clients, I say, regardless of whether you want to hire someone, that person should walk out that interview wanting to work for you in that company, in that role, at the very least for you and in that company, right? The role might not be right. Leave them with the impression that they want to work with you, right?
Because I think you got to remember, ultimately in the UK, the world of tech is small. And news travels fast. Myth and legend can grow up very, very quickly. So a rotten interview can hurt more than just that candidate sitting in front of you. That can ruin the whole pool for you.
Yeah, I totally agree. So switching gears a little bit, I have a belief that when we talk about DE&I, we quite often stop at the D part because it's the part that you can measure, right? And I actually think there's been a lot of progress, and I think that the cyber industry has become pretty good actually at seeing the value of hiring people from diverse backgrounds, and to some degree actually embracing that and walking the walk, right? I think sometimes where we get stuck is people from diverse backgrounds, they're either leaving the company or, as you say, the industry, more worryingly, because they feel excluded or they feel like they can't thrive, they can't kind of move forward. And for me, that's the piece around equity and inclusion. And I was wondering if you feel like there are ways that companies can effectively impact that equity and inclusion piece to keep people in the industry.
And there's, number one, you'd expect, I'm going to go back to data. I think it's really, really important that, as well as you say, doing the D part of the thing where you're ticking boxes, is to think about how are you gathering information and data on the culture and what the impact is on the ground and segmenting it. So as quickly as possible, there's ways of doing that quantitatively and qualitatively to understand those problems. So employee resource groups, town halls, listening sessions, where you can give people a voice to really hear what's going on, what's not going on. Using data to try and understand, our initiatives, our processes, our policies landing with everyone? Are we missing someone in that bit? But, measuring a table every day, it's still going to be a table. It's looking then at the actions. And companies are right, and I am pleased to see companies that are really trying to, using a data-led approach, listening into the voice of their employees to change policies and procedures. But culture is more than policies and procedures. It's what we reward, it's what we sanction. So I think it's very, very important to have good complaint procedures, good whistleblowing procedures, and for companies to have the integrity to act on unacceptable behavior, to draw a line on microaggressions, to really have that boldness. And that's good, and that draws a positive message, not just with underrepresented groups, but for everyone. That's that bringing together that culture. But then we often hear, people don't leave companies, they leave cultures or managers. But I'm tired of the manager bashing. that middle manager bashing. We always just roll our eyes. Oh, what can you do with the middle? You can do a lot. You know, and I think for companies combining training and support, you know, because particularly in tech, they probably didn't go into tech thinking, I want to be a great people manager. So how are we helping them and quantifying what good management looks like? What does it mean to be an inclusive manager? To then think about how are we driving behavior with the carrots, the sticks, the KPIs? And how are we holding people accountable? Support, but hold accountable to change those relationships. And that's where you then start moving into, that's how we keep people. The growing people takes intention. It takes companies willing to take the time to really map out career progressions, to look at how are we helping, particularly underrepresented groups. Are there barriers? Are we promoting only for those that are in the office 24/7? Are we going for proximity bias? And looking at ways to make sure that we're as inclusive in our bonuses and in our promotions as we are in our hiring. So it's boiling in every step of that process.
Yeah, and in opportunity, right? Just because somebody's not there physically, are they capable of doing more wherever they are, right?
And this is data-led, and this is really, really important to think about, is are we looking at the data to understand how are promotions, how are bonuses being levied? Are we going back to presenteeism, or is hybrid working now just the other mummy track that used to be going through? So it's really trying to challenge those things. I know of one company, it was really interesting, for their managers, rather than having them put together a case on why someone should be promoted or why someone should be getting a bonus, they had to put together a rationale on why someone shouldn't get. And it was interesting when that happened, the bonus structure for women suddenly went up. And that's for men and women. Remember, whenever we talk this is not just man bashing, it's bad men managers. We all internalize that bias. All right. That unconscious bias is something we're all bred in, but it's, you know, where companies are trying to think their way through it in really innovative ways is very powerful.
That is super cool. I definitely need to give that some thought as to how we do that as well. So that's cool. So again, just changing direction a little bit. So we talk a lot in the tech industry and in the cyber industry specifically around attracting people into the industry, right? Whether they are graduates or apprentices or career changers. And I think, you know, there are a lot of initiatives, a lot of programs to help people skill up and pick up the skills that would make them employable in the industry. But I do think that we have a little bit of a kind of potential issue coming up, right? If all of these people invest their time and money independently to get these skills and certifications into an industry that needs more staff, but then they don't end up getting jobs, then we're going to take more people away from that funnel of getting into the industry, and we'll end up with a bigger problem than we've got right now. So my question to you is, what advice would you give this time, not to the job seekers, but to the employers, about, you know, how to encourage them to consider hiring people who come from a non-traditional background, whether that's a candidate from a diversity background or not, but looking at people who haven't gone down that traditional path of perhaps a technical degree, and as you said early on in the conversation, 3 to 5 years experience in a comparable role. What advice would you give to people who are hiring?
So first of all, do your homework to reassure yourself and internal stakeholders, because there are some great statistics, there's some great research that is showing these other routes into tech, people from different backgrounds who've upskilled, cross-skilled. They are coming in feeling better prepared, but also more committed. People that are coming from these routes are more likely to stay in a job and to do that. And to really understand what you're buying into, these are people who very actively engage to do this. That's exactly the sort of thing. But you're going to have to change some of your expectations because you are hiring for potential. And it's also to think about rethinking. This is not a standard grad process. So there is some investment in time from a number of people. How do we create some coaching and support for these people who come in who may lack confidence? How do we help line managers support that? So it is understanding that getting up to full speed may be slower. But what we know in research, for example, from Code First Girls, those companies who are doing that and put that time in, those people who've done different routes and come in actually then accelerate even faster than standard candidates. So this is the sort of thing. You need to change the mindset internally and get the key stakeholders up to speed. And I also wouldn't hire in a different route for the first time and then put them in my most stressful, broken team. Okay, you don't throw it into the fire. Start in a place where there's the willing and there's the potential to succeed. Take your learnings, because every company is slightly different, but then from there you can spin into that to do it wider. But I think, remember, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. At the Tech Talent Charter, we have a number of free sessions, free materials where you can hear how companies have made these processes work, who have made, whether it be returner schemes, cross-skilling, upskilling, internal out. We've got research on things for boot camps. So you don't have to make it up yourself. That's always been our obsession. People don't have to reinvent the wheel. But you need to have intention. You need to have the stakeholders willing to do things differently. But if you do it, and if you start small and learn from it, do what we do in tech. Start small, pivot, and then you look at scaling. This can be successful. And one of the things I'd throw as a bonus idea, most of the companies that start on this route to bring in other people through these routes, it requires a different approach and a culture of learning. The companies who are doing that are talking about how the whole team benefits from that. Because ultimately, tech is a field in which we need a workforce who is constantly upskilling. So the thinking around how do we help upskill a new person coming in can then be applied across the team. So there's positive ripple effects across your organization that you could benefit from.
Yeah, I think your point about that kind of intention and the willingness, that's kind of the starting point, isn't it? And then go for the low-hanging fruit, right? Somebody who wants to do this within the broader team, they're going to, make a go of it, and then you learn from that. So yeah, start small.
Absolutely.
Right. Now, you touched on this already, but I thought it'd be beneficial to kind of understand from your perspective what role collaborations and partnerships with organisations and not-for-profits like the Tech Talent Charter, what role do they play in helping organisations build more diverse, equitable and inclusive teams?
One, I mean, there's just sheer efficiency of you not having to reinvent the wheel. So whenever I have a company coming to me and saying, oh, but, Debbie, we really want to help schools, I think that's super. Let's look at the 5, 6, 7 different organizations that are already doing super work that you can plug into so that, all of your energy, you get maximum benefit from that. But, looking at also people who are working with underrepresented groups. There's so much learning that you can gather quickly and easily. And I think it's about, this is a sector-wide problem. It's going to need sector-wide collaboration and solutions and learning from each other. And the great thing is that it is there. We now have 800 companies who work with us, who will share not just what works. And what's really valuable is people are willing to say, hey, we did this and it was broken and it was terrible, but this is how we fixed it. This is about that, as we talk about starting something small, learning, taking the learning, pivoting, innovating, and then looking at scaling. So whether it is reaching into underrepresented groups, and a number of our signatories do that, whether it's Auticon, working with neurodiversity, Black women who code, color in code. We've got Code First Girls. We have Teen Tech. We have STEMettes. We have Tech She Can, Institute of Coding, working with universities. So there's no reason you have to go it alone. And this is UK-wide. So if you're sitting there and feeling a bit grumpy and thinking, yes, but Debbie, I'm up in the Northwest, Look at who we have for Tech Talent Charter. There are cohorts you can link into and learn from and move faster and better and more effectively. Of course, you're going to customize it internally. But surely in tech, we know you take what's already been done and innovate from there. And there's so much that you can draw on. And there are so many people wanting to share and to look for partners to work together in the space to make a real difference.
Yeah. I guess, you don't have to make all the mistakes yourselves, right? You can learn from other people.
You can make new and different mistakes, right? Yeah. That's the exciting bit. But it is. I love watching in our sessions, and it's even interesting watching like really big companies working with small companies, because of course on the one hand the small companies are going, well, that's fantastic, I'm going to take the research that Unilever did, I'm going to learn what Lloyd's did and Bank of England did, and then I want to use it. But equally, big companies love learning from small companies because you can innovate quickly and come up with some really cunning solutions. But it's adapting, it's learning, it's working through that makes it exciting, that makes it positive. Why wouldn't you want to avoid the mistakes that other people down the road have made?
Yeah, it's the efficiency, right? So
absolutely. And I think that's the thing. The thing behind when we talk about EDI, DEI, D&I, whatever label, whatever alphabet you want to throw into that, this is not just social justice. That's the great thing about it in tech. This is smart business. Doing this, getting this right is better decision making, better products. And in making a more inclusive culture, you're not just going to attract more women, you're going to have happier men. I love at events, when I'm talking at events, and one of the things that I will talk about, parental leave, support for mental health. You'll have, for example, women nodding openly and men coming up to you and saying quietly, I find that really useful, I really want to do it. There's a point where everyone benefits from EDI. When I used to give talks, in front of big groups of CTOs, which is, a lot of middle class. And I remember one time I was giving a speech and I had actually had to come up on crutches because I had a serious injury and talking to him and saying, okay, if you think you don't need DEI, if you're never going to get old, sick, or injured, never have children, never have problems with your parents, never have mental health issues, and did I mention never get old, then you won't need it. Building in this inclusive culture is for everyone. And the other thing is, when I was on those crutches, when I was in this wheelchair, it brought home to me, I don't care how good the meeting, how good the event, 20% of my brain was always thinking in the background, okay, now how am I going to get out of here? Oh, do I need to go? Oh, no, but there's so, and you know what it's like. If you're the parent, you're constantly thinking, now how am I going to do the pickup? If you are gay in a very straight office, am I getting my pronouns right? Why wouldn't we want to build a culture where our team can use the whole of their brains to just be really good at their job, to free up that 20% of the brain, because they don't have to mask whatever is different, but they can just get on with doing their jobs.
Yeah, that was beautifully put together, Debbie. That's a really, really good way of kind of getting that message across, right? So thank you for that. Anything else that you wanted to get across around this topic of hiring for and retaining diverse staff in the cyber industry?
I think it's all for the winning. I think this is not like it was 10 years ago where there were a lot of mysteries and we don't know how to do this. All the ingredients are out there that would allow any company to attract, to hire, to retain, to grow great talent, and to fill all the gaps if there is intentionality, if there is a willingness to rethink at the very core of how you operate. And again, not just because it's the nice thing to do, it's smart business. Everyone will do it, but it won't happen by accidentally. No one's going to come and fix this and rescue any company. It is all there if companies are willing to start small, but start doing things differently.
Excellent. Thank you, Debbie, for sharing your thoughts, and look forward to speaking to you again.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.